So welcome back, everybody. So we're back in the afternoon session, the last session of the TIEMS annual conference. As you heard, we're having a few technical issues in terms of getting the speakers on board, but fortunately George is here to save the day. So today, with George's presentation, we'll be talking about modeling the Delta variant of COVID. All right, looks great. Okay, George, over to you.
So I'll get going here. So my topic today is modeling the Delta and Omicron variants. Originally it was just called the Delta variant, but times have changed. So here's what we have to do. So the introduction is, last year at the TIEMS annual conference, I presented a general talk about modeling and battling COVID-19. And we have learned a lot about COVID-19 since that talk, but many of the concepts from that talk in 2020 are the foundation for this talk and for understanding some of the things that have happened. So before I get into the details, I want to just compare, take a high level view of where we are right now compared to where we were back in November 2020. So this is the slide from that presentation. And you can see at that time in the United States, we had about 250,000 people dead, 12 million people infected, 82,000 people in the hospital at the time. And my words were in that talk is that we still have a difficult battle ahead of us to control this pandemic. So this is exactly what I said a year ago. And now we look, and what do we see? We've made some progress. You can see this was the time of the talk last year. Okay, this is October, this is November. We hit a ridiculous peak, then we started coming down, and now we are again climbing. Now this is just in the US, but these are the statistics that we have right now. We went from 12 million cases to 50 million. You can see the hospitalizations a little bit less, but we've gone from about 250,000 dead to about 800,000. This has been the fatality rate. This is a percentage of reported infections. So you can see it's around 2%, which is not very encouraging. And so the question is, how much progress have we made? How can we do better? What are the obstacles? And I can repeat my quote from a year ago: we still have a difficult battle ahead of us to control this pandemic. And I hope to explain through models what actually is going on. And one of the things that I have to note is that these numbers that I'm reporting here pretty much are up through Delta, okay? So this is not really reflecting Omicron, and we'll discuss a little bit the relationship between Delta and Omicron. So a lot has changed since the talk was given in 2020. It's kind of hard to imagine all the things that have happened. So number one, we now have vaccines, which in November 2020 were just a glimmer. We now have breakthrough and repeat infections. Okay, so vaccines have not exactly worked as flawlessly as we had hoped they would work. We now have new variants of COVID-19, which have made the situation a lot more complicated. And these are three things we did not have to deal with in our simple 2020 model. Okay, so what I want to do is basically talk a little bit about how you have to change the models to take into account these new factors. And because, you know, this is a limited talk, 25 minutes, it's hard to get into all the details. So I'm going to give more a qualitative overview and hope to put out a future longer paper with more of the details behind this. So let's review some of the key ideas to a simple model. The models we present are known as compartmental models. So we divide the population into different compartments, and we establish rules on how people go from one compartment to the other. Now, it's a simple model, or it can start out as a simple model. It can quickly get more complicated, as you'll see. But the idea is we assume that all individuals in the same compartment behave the same. So it's a statistical model. And the more compartments we establish, the more accurate the model. And so again, most of these models are short-term models, so we ignore events such as births and immigration and things like that. So the model we discussed last year is called the SIR model because it has 3 compartments labeled S, I, and R. And this was first proposed back in the 1920s, 1930s, just about a little less than a century ago, and is the basis for many models in use today, and will be kind of expanded in this talk. And the SIR model is called that because there are 3 compartments, S standing for susceptible people, I standing for infectious people, and R standing for recovered people. Now, the names are very suggestive, but you have to be careful about how you understand the terms. For example, you notice this model has no place for, there's no compartment labeled D for dead, okay? And the reason is that in this very simple model, dead people are viewed as recovered. And that at first strikes people as odd, but recovered is really all the people can no longer infect other people. So a better name might have been called U for uninfectious, but that is one of the things you can do in a model is add a new compartment called D for dead people, okay? So infectious people is also, you need to understand what that term is, that this is not the same as infected people. Infectious people are people who can infect other people. So as we've discovered with COVID, it's possible for somebody to be infectious and technically be infected, but not really suffer from any symptoms. Okay, they could be what's known as an asymptomatic carrier. So, you know, and it may also be that people might harbor an infection, but not actually generate particles that would infect other people. They might only be infectious for part of the time that they are infected, okay? And similarly, if a person is infectious, but you have a quarantine system or the person self-quarantines, then they aren't infectious for 15 days. They might only be infectious for 5 days because they might go into quarantine. So there are all these kinds of facts that for any individual case need further analysis, you know, and so that these terms are a little bit different and you have to really understand what they mean precisely. Okay, and so a lot of people who end up with, you know, severe damage, maybe kidney damage or whatever, are still considered recovered, even though the average person might not think of them as recovered, because we usually think of recovered as being completely normal. Okay, so I think I've made this point. All right, so let's move on. Susceptible person is a person who's not infected, but could become infectious to exposure. Okay, and in general, if you have 6 compartments, I mean 3 compartments, you have 6 possible relations that you can have. You could, if you just assume that a person can go from any compartment to any other, then you have to give rules for how they move between them. So this is given by this graph. Okay, in last year's talk, we kind of restricted the emotion of people, and we just assumed that if you're susceptible, you could be go to infectious, and from infectious to recovered. So we could call this our basic diagram. And from that, we came up with a series of equations, and obviously I don't have time to go into that this year, and you can look at last year's talk, or if you go to my website, I have an expanded paper available where you can read all the details. So the first thing is we want to say, well, how do we bring vaccinations into our model? And it turns out how you bring them in depends on some assumptions that you make. So number one, you might have that a vaccinated person is never infectious. In other words, they might get sick, but they might never be able to infect anybody, okay? And so that's one assumption. You might assume that vaccinated people become infectious at a lower rate than non-vaccinated people. You might also assume that vaccinated people recover faster than non-vaccinated people. Now, each of these cases would lead to modified equations, and obviously in a 25-minute talk, we're not going to get into that, but we can present a qualitative picture. So here's what might happen if vaccinated people are never infectious. Instead of just S going to I to R, you might have people who are susceptible, once they get vaccinated, go into recovered because they can no longer infect people. This, of course, doesn't even mean that they don't get sick or they don't get some symptoms, but it means they're never infectious. They can never infect anybody. Okay, that's probably not the case with COVID. We know that vaccinated people can get sick, so we don't worry. So that's not the right model. Suppose you have vaccinated people become infectious at a lower rate. Well, then the way you would model this, or one way to model this, is to have an extra compartment called vaccinated. And so you have some flow of people who are susceptible become vaccinated, and then you have flows from unvaccinated people to infectious and from vaccinated people to infectious. And you would have different parameters on these different edges, and then people would still go from infectious to recovered. What if vaccinated people recover faster? So again, this would lead to a 5-compartment model where people can go from susceptible to vaccinated, and then they can go to vaccinated, infectious, or non-vaccinated infectious, and you would have different parameters for these arcs. Okay, so again, we would need new equations to reflect moving between compartments. The second thing we talked about is, how do you model breakthrough or repeat infections? And the answer is, you now take the very simplest way to model that is to look at your SIR model and have a backwards arc. In other words, people recover, but then they can also go back to being susceptible at some sort of way. Now, you have to carefully put these equations together so you don't get some kind of unusual behavior, but again, that's beyond the scope of this talk. And there may be other complications because you might want to go back and add the behavior of the vaccinated people. So you can see this SIR model, the very simple model that we had last year, needs to be updated to model some of these new things. Over the past 2 years, there have been several variants of COVID-19 with different characteristics, and typically one variant is replaced by another if the newer variant is more infectious than the current variant. Originally, I was going to the talk I would propose giving was called Modeling the Delta variant of COVID-19. But even as we speak, it appears that the Omicron variant is on its way to replace the Delta variant around the world, which is why we changed the title of this presentation. And the jury is still out. We still don't know whether Omicron is more deadly than Delta, but it seems to be significantly more contagious and readily infects many vaccinated people, especially if it's been a while since the person was last vaccinated. Now, how do you model variants? Well, one of the simplest things is, instead of having one group of infectious people, you could have 2 groups of infectious people. So this is a simple modification. And so people go to this group at a certain rate, they go to this group at another rate. And then what you're also interested in is what percentage of people end up being infected with the first variant and what percentage of people end up being infectious with the second variant. Okay, so again, there are various complications, but fortunately for all of us, there's a website called covariance.org, where not only have they studied this question, but they've put together a set of compelling graphs. And if you want, they even will give you the programming, the program, so you can generate your own versions of the graphs. This was done by Emma Hodcroft. And so thanks to her and her colleagues for putting this site together. And so now you notice here we have, as a part of it, they also have a number of compelling graphs that show what's happening in various countries around the world. You can see here, for example, some of the variants that have occurred. And one of the things that I want people to notice is that there have been 3 variants of Delta. I mean, even when we say Delta, Delta itself is not a single variant. Omicron, just recently, like 2 days ago, they've discovered there are at least 2 variants of Omicron, one of which is much harder to detect. And here you have, they provide a very detailed chart, which I won't even begin to try to explain, showing you how these different variants are labeled in different systems. And let's talk about South Africa, because that's where the Omicron variant was first observed. And the green, the variations, what this chart there shows you what percentage of the infections belong to which variant. So here, up until August 2020, they weren't really tracking variants. Then, as you can see from the color code, this is the alpha variant, or maybe it's the beta variant. So the beta variant took off and was not quite 100%. That means they didn't really classify this percentage of the infections. Then you can see over here, around April of this year, Delta started coming and very quickly became the dominant type. There were 3 types of Delta, but this dark green Delta became the dominant. And then suddenly you can see that somewhere near the end of October, maybe beginning of November, this purple color is Omicron. And you can see that almost, I mean, literally in 2 weeks, this became completely replaced Delta. And not only that, but it became 100% of the infections. Okay, but what is really striking is the speed with which Omicron overtook the infections. Now, if you look around the world, you can see Omicron beginning to appear in many places and actually breaking through. So here's a graph of what's happening in the Netherlands, and you can see that over here at the end of the graph, Omicron is already up to 80% of all the infections. And look at how quickly that happened. That was about 2 weeks' time. Omicron became the dominant variant. Okay, here's, for example, a graph from India. And you can see, I'm not quite entirely sure why Delta made kind of a bounce back here, but it's a significant thing. And I suspect that as this graph goes forward, you're going to see the purple take over. France, you can already see Omicron appearing here in the top right corner, and it's already up to, looks like roughly, if this whole thing's 25%, maybe it's about 10% of all the infections, but there's a good chance that it will very soon become the dominant variant. Here you can see it just appearing in the United Kingdom in the right corner. It's beginning to appear in the US, enough so that it's on the graph. And even in Australia, which has been doing a good job of battling the virus, you can see this appearing. How this all develops is hard to tell, but here's just an article from yesterday that the Omicron variant is 3 times more likely to cause reinfection than Delta. This is the very scary part, is that it seems to evade vaccines, and just because you've had COVID before doesn't necessarily protect you from having it again. So what are some conclusions? Omicron seems much more contagious than Delta, takes over rapidly from Delta, and it seems to be less affected by vaccines than Delta. And we don't know how lethal it is. Okay, a lot of the infections that we've seen in places like South Africa were among young people, and but I believe that within a month or two, Omicron will dominate the world in the sense that it will be the most common variant. And we could be in for a very difficult time. If Omicron is at least as lethal as Delta, we are going to have a lot of problems on our hands. If we're lucky and it's not as lethal, in other words, it might be more contagious, but it might not really kill or hurt people, then in some ways it could benefit us by maybe bringing the pandemic to an end. Anyway, I urge everyone not to relax their precautions until we know more about Omicron. And I know people are tired of precautions and all that, but Omicron is extremely contagious. And so I want to warn people about it. So anyway, I hope that my quick tour of modeling helps to kind of bring into focus how this is carried out and how it's an important tool in understanding what's happening with the pandemic and how to manage it. So this is what I wanted to say, and so I'm ready to take questions or whatever.
Thanks, George. Much appreciated. So if there's any questions, or you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A, and we'll be able to address those and to get George to answer those. And while we wait to see if anybody has any questions, I was looking at an article yesterday, and it was really talking about, and I'd just love to get your opinion, George, but it was really talking about sort of the vaccine distribution, of course, right? Mm-hmm. So vaccine inequality, and then all the new variants, and sort of the theme of this article, the idea, the premise is that as long as there's sort of vaccine inequality, that we'll continue to see variants over time, like repeatedly over and over again. What are your sort of thoughts on that? Is that something that you've actually looked into, or is that something that you sort of encountered in all your research?
Well, I maybe peripherally, one of the questions, dealing with variants, for example, which I didn't mention in this talk, but apparently there are animals who are being infected by the different variants. And in the US, they discovered, much to people's surprise, that deer are carrying the variants. So one thing in terms of what happens with variants and new variants developing is it's possible for animals to also harbor this infection. And so from that perspective, we're not, I guess nobody's talked about vaccinating animals. And in fact, it's believed that the original COVID-19 came from some animal, possibly a bat or something like that. So dealing with humans having it is only part of the problem. You also have to think a little bit about how you might handle what they call animal reservoirs. Now, the whole question of vaccine distribution is complicated because, as we know, there are places where people are not getting vaccinated and have an oversupply of vaccine. There are places where people are desperate to get vaccinated and there's an undersupply. That's a whole nother topic about how it's being spread. Are people taking advantage? Because I think there are cases where vaccine is shipped, but it's never used. And some of the vaccines are difficult to distribute. For example, Pfizer requires very advanced refrigeration, which might not be available everywhere. So you might have doses of Pfizer, but if you have to keep it at minus 60 degrees or something like that, getting it to various places might be difficult. So it's a complicated question, very important question. So it's a good question, and I don't have a great answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure that anybody has the answer, but it's just one of these sort of topics that continue to circulate because we are all struggling with trying to get through the pandemic. Next question for you, George, is first of all, excellent presentation. My question is, what might be a cause of differences between various countries in the progression of different variants of the virus?
Well, there are a number of causes. For example, everybody believes that even if Omicron is not completely, um, is not completely stopped by the vaccine, it might be stopped by the vaccine. And so now people are saying things like, well, if you have the booster shot, that's much more effective than just having, say, 2 doses of Pfizer or Moderna. And so, number one, the factor is how is vaccination distributed through a country will affect how it's spread. Another thing, for example, is what's the age distribution of the population? One of the things that people have observed that many parts of Africa, even though they're not highly vaccinated, have a lower than an expected rate of COVID-19 infection. And one theory is that, perhaps some people, because of other diseases that they encounter, like malaria, that maybe having antibodies to other diseases also might interfere with COVID-19. There are so many questions that we don't have good answers for, but those could be some of the factors. So it could be vaccine distribution, how many people have had boosters, what types of vaccines people had, the age distribution, and possibly antibodies that have originated in response to other infections.
Okay, thanks. There's another question here, which is the Thanksgiving experience in the U.S., which caused spikes in caseloads, urges us to exercise extreme caution and avoid large social gatherings during Christmas and New Year holiday season, especially given the way Omicron has spread to over 60 countries in the past 2 weeks. Do you see the infection spreading throughout fresh waves in the new year?
Yes, as I said, I think we're in for a tough time. You could see when I went back, if you look at this graph, okay, you can see that it really took off right around this time a year ago. And if you look here, you can see that plus 27% is how much it changed in 14 days. And the curve is once again rising. Now, remember, this is a US curve, and this is mostly Delta. Omicron is much more infectious. Now, it's possible that the curve could get very steep and kind of the infection might burn through the population very quickly, but we just don't know. We really don't know what the interaction is going to be between people who have been boosted, people who just have 2 shots, or people who had their shots 6 months ago, or unvaccinated people. I think unvaccinated people are probably a very great danger, and there is, I think, the very real possibility that hospitals will again be in very difficult situations because of the large number of people being infected. So I hate to be the Grinch before the holidays, but I think we really have to be very careful.
And last question we have here is, can you also guide us about the long-term impact of COVID-19 and long COVID effects?
Well, that's not something that I really studied, and the purpose of the talk was to really look at the spread of COVID and how it's likely to spread and what's there. I'm not a doctor, and so I probably don't know anything extra about this than what's been covered in a lot of articles, but it's certainly very much a concern. And once we have more statistics, one of the difficulties with dealing with long COVID is diagnosing that it's long COVID. I mean, if you have a population, some percentage of people will suffer some things. I mean, some percentage will get cancer, some percentage will have heart attacks, some percentage will have kidney failure, dementia, any number of things. Now, tying it back to exactly COVID is difficult because so many people have had COVID or been infected and maybe didn't display symptoms, and saying that, well, this person developed this particular symptom because of COVID is tricky. And I don't think that we really, I think that is one of the limitations about talking about long COVID is being sure that you actually have a case of long COVID. But again, these kinds of ideas that were presented here in terms of modeling could potentially apply to modeling things like long COVID, where you start off with people who have COVID instead of S being susceptible people as people who had COVID, and then you might look at how people go into different compartments, and the compartments might represent different symptoms and stuff. But this is not anything that I've done any analysis on at this point.
Okay, George, thank you very much for the presentation. Very insightful and very interesting, to say the least. Okay, so next we have one of our speakers did not show up today, but we do have Simona Cavallini is here with us now. And so Simona, I'll turn it over to you for the next presentation. Thank you.
So good afternoon all. My name is Simona Cavallini. I am from the Italian chapter of TIEMS, and I'm very pleased to be here to present my work related to urban safety and urban security. I'm going to present you what part of my work that was related to the definition of a conceptual framework to assess and measure urban safety and urban security. What I'm going to present you is the rationale for this kind of research, addressing some research question and focusing on the background. We look at other existing approaches and tools, examples worldwide, because urban dimension is crucial due to the fact that there is this trend also in the medium and long-term period where cities will be even more populated than now. So cities will be a key point to address if we are looking at security and safety. We take a look to the main actors, let me say, in our model, in our theoretical model, that are involved in the domain of urban security and urban safety. And I will present you this experiment that we did as in terms of conceptual framework, focusing on a conceptual framework of indicators to measure urban safety and urban security, starting from the definition of the phenomenon and the understanding which is the added value of what is proposed. And I will show you some structure of the framework. Then, as the framework is foreseen as a tool for urban authorities that can use to self-assess their urban safety or urban security. We propose also a checklist to make operational the framework. Why to measure and assess urban safety and urban security? This is one of the key actions of the urban agenda for the EU. The urban agenda for the EU is this wide scope initiative of the European Union, focusing on the needs of urban domains. So one of them was selected years ago, was the security, and the security focusing on the domain of public spaces. So there was built a partnership with the actors such as organization, think tanks, an expert in urban security, including in this partnership also a number of cities that led different actions. If for who is more interested in urban agenda and security in public spaces partnership, there is the link in this presentation of the final action plan. There are 6 different actions in this partnership. Action 1 was focused on the development of the framework for assessment tool dedicated to urban authorities. As I mentioned before, cities were involved, and in this case, the city of Helsinki was the leader, together with Madrid and some cities in Italy, in the Italian Emilia-Romagna region. The result of this work was the report that I'm going to present you, the main results of this report. I started in understanding what has been done in other cities in the world. And my mapping exercise led to, let me say, an overview of 4 categories of tools and approaches that are used in the world. I investigated in depth 12 of them, but we can say that when an urban authority is looking for assessing urban safety and urban security, there are these tools. Some are tools that surveys, for instance, that ask information about the perception to citizens, for instance, and then cover more than one city. So it's a common approach that sometimes is developed at national level or regional level that is given to the urban authorities to understand which is the situation. The positive, let me say, feedback that the positive side is that there is an homogeneous approach that is used at maybe national level. There are some surveys that are addressed to citizens and are built and created ad hoc by the urban authorities leading the city. In some other cases, there are some indexes developed by think tank experts for benchmarking and assessing or ranking more than one urban areas. And then there are some indexes for self-assessment that are developed by cities. The exercise that I did was focusing on developing an index or a tool for self-assessment that is in the hands of one specific urban authority. Just to give you the idea of the huge effort that is in the world in assessing urban safety and urban security, for some reason, urban authorities are doing this exercise to build useful policies to reduce the crime, to prevent crime. On the other side, we have some tools that just would like to assess. It's I think that one example is what is currently happening in Mexico. This is a clear example of a survey that is at national level that is spread in the country. So 85 cities are investigating which is the feeling of insecurity, essentially, of their citizens. What we can see is that these tools are excellent to make comparison of the situation in different cities in a specific country. There are some also surveys to investigate which is the situation of the cities and the perception of the citizen of safety and security at the city level. This tool, for instance, this investigation has been carried out from the municipality of Piraeus within a project that is funded by the European Commission. So the municipality is addressing some specific departments, some specific district, understanding with the survey which is the situation of security and safety in the area. About the indexes, this is a very interesting exercise because some think tanks, such as one group that is very famous, that is from The Economist, built this Safe Cities Index. So a way to understand which is the situation in each city and trying to benchmark. From the benchmark and some best practice identified in some cities, they are going to suggest improvement, exchange of best practice from cities. And you can find, for instance, indications in the report that they produce every 2 years. In this case, for example, they are not referring to information of citizens, but collecting some feedback from the experts on the domain in each cities. One of the key points is the different aspects that should be investigated in terms of security. And in this case, for instance, they focus on digital security, health security, infrastructure security, and personal security. One of the most famous exercises in terms of self-assessment is the security profile that is produced by the city of Rotterdam. This is a huge exercise that is carried out by the municipality, not only for the municipality, but investigating the 71 neighborhoods that there are in the city, building a very structured approach for indicators, indexes, and covering 3 domains. One is related to the safety, one is related to the social aspects, and another one is related to the physical domain. And it's a mixed approach, including data from the municipality, from the police, and collecting also information from citizens. This exercise of mapping the situation at world level of what is currently running. There are also programs of the United Nations on safer cities, but it's not the moment to focus on them. Make evident that 3 are the main actors that are involved in the domain of urban safety and urban security, with a precise role to improve and to affect the policies and the state of urban safety and urban security. First of all, we have the urban authorities that one of the main goals the focus to increase urban safety and urban security through the prevention of crime and violence. So they focus on social cohesion to avoid issues in terms of crime in the city. And another goal that they have is the quality of life of the citizens, together with the improvements of the livability of public spaces. So the goals, the instruments that they have in their hands are policies or strategies or plans that in some terms affect this dimension, so social cohesion, quality of life, and public spaces, to create an environment with less crime activities. For sure, we have local policies and local law enforcement agencies that they have the main goal to fight crime and violence within the urban domain. They focus on work based on investigation and acting on the crime to respond. They respond to crime and violence. They have as a main goal the activities the activities to respond to crime, but they are also a very important source in terms of information of what is running in terms of crime and violence, because they have, let me say, at local level, what we can call the situational awareness on urban security. Last but not the least, we have the citizens that, first of all, in our model, in our idea in this domain, focus on their quality of life. And this is a dimension that is affected by the social cohesion and the availability of public spaces and the situation in terms of urban security. They are also involved in a domain that it's very interesting to be investigated in terms of policies, because they have not only the overview of the situation, the objectives overview, but what is very interesting is to investigate the sense of safety that they have. Because on one side, there is a situation, on the other side, there is the perception of the citizen. So a number of policies can be also addressed to improve the perception of the real situation if the situation is better than the one that is perceived by citizens. So in this framework, with these actors that, let me say, have the same objective to be secure and safe in their urban environment, we identify two main gaps related to the knowledge of urban authorities that they may have in defining effective policies for urban security and safety. The first point that we discuss a lot with the urban authorities in the action is what is need to know to properly assess urban safety and urban security. So the idea was to build a conceptual framework of indication. So what is needed to be measured, what is needed to monitor it over time. And then one that this framework is there, the indicators are defined, which are the suggestion to make it operational and creating something that helps cities to implement this framework. I would like how to build a conceptual framework for cities. First of all, one of the most important challenges that we have to face is to build something very comprehensive that can be tailored for cities' needs, but especially take into account the size of the cities, because cities can have different perspectives, different needs in terms of urban safety and security. So first of all, we start with the definition of the phenomenon. We highlighted which is the added value of our framework, and then we propose a structure of the framework with, as I mentioned before, a checklist to suggest how to make it operational. We spent time in defining the definition. I don't want to enter too much in the definition, but the partnership decided to focus on one specific, some specific definition of urban security and urban safety. So main elements, which are urban security is related to harms caused by intentional human action and behavior. And these harms can affect assets, infrastructure, and citizens in the territory of the city. Urban safety is caused by intentional human action as well as behaviors not intentional or due to also some natural disasters, for example, such as earthquakes or pandemics and so on. These are the two domains that we would like to investigate. And let me add that we consider urban safety something that was affecting only the citizens. So safety is something that concerns citizens and not the infrastructure in this study. Additionally, we were asked to focus only on crime, especially on crime. So in some sense, we removed the effects of some natural disaster and pandemics for this preliminary analysis of the urban safety and urban security. So in some sense, we can say that the definition of urban security encompasses the definition of urban safety. Other two main elements that were important to define at the beginning of the study was the sense of safety. So in terms of perception of urban security, feeling of citizen or people about what is in the territory. And again, public space. This is another boundary of the study, because we are not investigating, for instance, the feeling within of the citizen within their own homes, but only when they move through the city. What we would like to propose is a very comprehensive framework, take into account what we call the objective perspective, so the status of security and safety, and take into account also the perception, as we understood that in the surveys, the tools that I mentioned before, in the surveys that are used worldwide, a lot of urban authorities, including police forces, use the perception and not the real data on security and safety to decide actions and to define policies. We included also some dimension related to the quality of life. Still, again, it's related to maybe it's quite connected to the perception, but as we saw in the example and the work done by the city of Rotterdam, is crucial to have also the dimension of the quality of life of the residents to compare the situation of security and safety. We include a dimension related to social cohesion that, especially in multi-ethnic cities or specific districts, social cohesion, there is some literature that demonstrate that social cohesion reduces the crime. So to have a perception of which is the social cohesion of the cities give us an idea on the potential factors that may increase crime and violence. We focus on public spaces as requested. We included some background conditions related to the cities that are investigated. We try to address as much as possible the issues and measuring the security and safety, take into account that our tool can be used by cities of any size. And we built a structure that allows comparison over time within cities and also, if needed, between cities. The result is of the framework. These are the components. Most of the, as we saw, for instance, in the economist approach, there are some components that are grouping the variables and indicators that are used. We have 6 main components: quality of life, social cohesion, public space livability, sense of safety, urban security and background condition. Quality of life, social cohesion and public space livability have 2 dimensions, let me say. One is related to the perception and one related on the status. The perception is with the collection of information from citizens, and the status with data that are available in urban authorities and police forces. Other elements of the framework that we propose, these numbers refers to the number of indicators that are included in the theoretical exercise. At the end, we have a framework with almost 200 variables or indicators that can be selected or adjusted by the urban authorities. These are some examples. This is the part of the framework related to public space livability. We have, for instance, some indicators related to cycle paths, for instance. The livability of public space is affected by the number of or the length of the cycle paths. We indicated which indicators can be measured by the urban authority, how to measure it, for instance, the kilometers per inhabitants, and which is the source of this information. So in this case, we are talking about some information that are already available in the databases of the urban authorities. Another example, and so these are information that are available, mainly available in the database of the urban authorities, or that urban authorities can organize themselves to collect. Other information, other indicators, for instance, are those related to the sense of safety. We focus on one of these specific dimensions that are the concern about crime and other nuisance. For instance, information about concern about homicides. The indicator can be, for instance, worries about being victim of homicide. What we propose in terms of measurement is a resident assessment based on a Likert scale. So there is a question that asks to the residents if they have no worries or are extremely worried about to be victims of homicides, and which are the possible sources. We suggested to the urban authorities to build a questionnaire to be submitted. Some authorities are already doing it once a year or twice a year or every 2 years to understand which is the feeling of the population in all these domains. So at the end, we have a framework that was proposed to urban authorities for its operationalization that collect data from urban authorities. Other domains that I didn't show you are referring to data that can be collected by police forces. And these also increase cooperation between law enforcement agencies and urban authorities, not only in fighting crime with prevention, action, and reaction, but also in sharing information and data on this phenomenon. We built a framework that is characterized by modularity. We have, for instance, some feedback from some cities that they are not interested in some of the dimensions that we identify. So maybe they would like to start with focusing on indicators on specific aspects because they are interested more maybe in livability on public spaces than in the social cohesion. And again, we have another element that is the adaptability of the framework. So it can be scaled down or scaled up in terms of territorial scope. For instance, some cities are focusing or would like to focus on specific district and not all on the urban territory they have to manage. We know that at the end of this work, we have a number of indicators that are likely to be available for other cities. So the idea was also to understand what is possible, what is feasible, and which kind of investment the city should do to have a framework, a complete framework. So we suggested at the end of this work a pilot data collection with involving some urban authorities to make operational, revise, and validate the framework. One other step was the proposal of a checklist. We have some assumption to make operational this framework. So for sure that we have some cities that have high level, let me say, in the top position of their policy agenda, the improvement of city security and the perception of citizens. They have already one department in charge of policies to increase security and prevent crime. That they agree, okay, and on the conceptual framework, and are available to define a standard method that allows also to measure and monitor what is related to urban safety and urban security over time. These are just some main elements of our checklist. We try to ask some questions. So urban authorities are asked to answer to this question to understand which are the starting point, what is needed, and what they have to do to make operational the framework. So the part related to the checklist, we aim to suggest some concrete hints to be addressed by the department that is in charge of the policies for security and prevention of crime of the city. And we propose some approaches also focusing on the gradual implementation of the framework. This is the two that we propose to the urban authorities within this framework. I would like just to add one element that the security and public space partnership is closing its activities this year, and in the new urban agenda, security will take even more important role in the policies of the European Commission. So this work is the preliminary step of further activities and further assessment exercises of the urban safety in Europe.
Great, thank you very much. That's very interesting and quite comprehensive, and I can imagine the amount of data and information you had to go through to sort of get this wider, broader overview of the urban environment. If you have any questions for Simona, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and then we can answer them there. I think one question I might have, Simona, for you is really in terms of the integration of technology. Is there sort of a vision in terms of the integration of technology and data and analytics and everything else as we start looking at smart cities and everything that they've been looking at the last 5 years or so, in terms of helping to analyze this urban development and growth that you're talking about in terms of public safety as well?
Yeah, okay. In our framework, technologies were considered also only as a tool to collect information and data. So for us, cameras for security are only considered a tool that can provide some useful information to, for instance, police forces about something, about the crime, instead of making some questions or questionnaires to the citizen, because they collect directly information about security in certain areas. And the second reason, because we consider only a tool, is that, if I'm not wrong, action 2 of the urban agenda focus on smart cities. So it's also a matter of, I suggest who is interested also in the past work, all the information reports that has been carried out for the 6 actions are available online. So there are also the report, one of the report that I did was for action 1, was one of the 3, if I'm not wrong, of the action 1, but each of the 6 actions has different report. And one of these actions, again, or action 2 or action 5, is focusing on smart cities and technologies. So it was only a matter of domain of investigation.
Great, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. So
thank you.
What we are going to do now is we are going to turn over to Harald. Harald, if you're there. And it looks like we're going to start closing out the conference. So Harald, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. The first thing we like to do is to give the word to George to tell. He will be the host, or TIEMS US chapter will be the host. He's the president of the chapter, to tell us about our plans for 2022.
All right, so this is going to set us up for next year. And so I want to just say, as we've agreed to host the 2022 annual conference, we hope to follow the path that was blazed by the French chapter, because this was a tremendous conference, and we would like to continue the tradition of great conferences. Right now, we're planning to have a hybrid event so people can participate virtually and in person, but we really hope that we'll be far enough advanced with this pandemic that we could meet in person. So we are working on 3 possible dates. Depending on the availability of the site that we've chosen, those are the possible dates. 2 weeks in September, a week in October. We want to hold the event at a time when travel is not likely to be impacted negatively, but you know, that is the tail end of hurricane season, so I guess we need a little bit of luck. And the location is, so number one, if you're interested in helping us with the conference, there's my email. You can contact me. We're hoping to have the physical location of the conference at FEMA's Emergency Management Institute. This is located near Washington, D.C. It used to be a small Catholic women's college. It was purchased by FEMA, so it really looks like a college. They have residential facilities, which we hope to use, which we think will lower the costs. So if people are worried about staying in a hotel, we also will need to provide transportation to help people reach the conference site. Here's a map. There's the Emergency Management Institute, and it's about 60 miles, about 100 kilometers from Dulles International Airport. So Dulles International Airport is in the outskirts of Washington, and Baltimore is a bit closer. So we hope to, you know, maybe have some event in Washington, D.C., maybe at the close of the conference, the beginning or something like that. But this is very good territory. This is the kind of a map of the facility. Here's the Emergency Management Institute, but they have a whole campus, which includes the U.S. National Fire Academy, and it has a museum. And so I think it'll be very interesting. Here's kind of a photo of the area, kind of an aerial view. And this is, like I said, it looks like a college campus. So, because it was a college campus. So it would be a very interesting venue. We still have to confirm its availability. This is what it looks like inside. So it has a number of auditoriums, meeting rooms, things like that. I think we could have a really successful conference. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions. Here's another view of the Emergency Management Institute. So again, we haven't confirmed this, but we've gotten some positive indications that this might be likely, and we're working on making this a reality.
That looks great. Any questions from the audience still with us? No, it doesn't seem so, but we will, of course, soonest make the agreement with Directors Jeff Stern, who actually was our keynote speaker earlier, and also on the dates, such that we can go out and send out our first call for the conference. And the US chapter will also come up with a theme, the topic, the main topic for the conference. So we will start as early as possible to announce it, so we have good time to collect papers, set up the program, and as George says, it might be very similar to what we have done this year. And I like the concept of that hybrid event, because I think we have to live with that.
I think also, if we want to reach out to the world, there are going to be people for whom it would be very difficult to come in person. And I think having people from around the world participate and listen is very important.
Yeah, I agree. And and actually, for those of you who don't remember or haven't heard our history, TIEMS was actually established in Washington, D.C. in 1993. So this is then our 29th annual conference that will take place in USA. So you missed the 30th by 1 year, but we can always celebrate the 29th as well. So, and this is also a very historical place, isn't that right, George?
Yeah, actually, if you're interested in politics, Camp David, where the US president has a retreat, is right, almost borders this place. So it's very close. I was told that if you jog, you have to be careful about where you jog because you might get into a security area.
Yeah, but there is also this fighting areas from the Civil War, isn't it? Very close by.
The Battle of Gettysburg was nearby, and kind of a critical battle in the U.S. Civil War. So, you know, that might be, we might be able to arrange some tours and things like that of Gettysburg, and maybe, like I said, ideally, we could find something in Washington that people can go to before the conference or after the conference. So we're working on all these ideas.
Yeah, I see that no questions have come up, but you can send all the questions to George. And if you like to join us to help with arrangement, doing certain, have a workshop, lead a panel discussion, every idea is very welcome. But I will then continue with what did we do at this conference, try to sum up. And actually, I asked Victoria, and she's told me that we have had 773 viewers during the conference. I think that's quite good. We had close to 300 registrants. And I think I haven't counted all, but we had, I think we had 55 presentations. That's quite good. And only one no-show. And I think that's also good. We had a problem the first day with one speaker who actually had lost his internet, but we were able to connect him later in the day. So we only missed the conference, the one presentation today. Yeah, there I see that George put out his email. I think during this conference we have addressed a lot of topics, interesting topics. So, and we have got a lot of good feedback from different comments given during the conference. So what will happen now is we will finish the proceedings. There we will collect all the papers, all the presentations, and that will be available on the website, and we will notify you. And so those of you who are still with us, if you haven't sent your presentation to Roman Tandlich is the guy that has to receive all the presentation and collect them. And then you can find there, we also have the video, which will be edited, and that will also be put out. So you can go back and look at how you performed. If you were a speaker, you will be there. Then assuming if someone doesn't like to have their video out, they have to tell us. We will inform about that. I hope you find this useful. And how do I measure if this has been a good conference or not? Well, I have put up some thoughts about that and saying, well, we have invited you to become members of TIEMS. So if I see there is coming in new members, that's one sign that you find this good. Second thing, if someone feel, okay, I like to be part of this fantastic international network, I like to create a chapter in my country or in my region, that will also be a positive indicator. And a third, that I have also presented our certification, TQC and TQAC. So if you say, okay, this is interesting, and I like to also be certified. These are the three main indicators of that you have been happy with the conference. And we have elected a new board. All those information will go out to everybody, will be put on the website. And also we have officers. We appoint officers every year which do certain work for us. Both directors and officers, they work voluntary. The officers have certain duties, like being an editor, like being a chairman for the International Program Committee, etc. So if you have ideas and say, okay, TIEMS is missing that and that, I really like to add that area or task to TIEMS. So tell us and we can appoint you as an officer, and then you will also be a member of TIEMS advisory board and also meet in TIEMS board. And there's a lot of learn from all those good people we have working in TIEMS. And you will also be a member of TIEMS International Group of Experts. And as I also mentioned in the beginning of the conference, we are at the present involved in 3 research projects for the European Union. One was presented Thursday, the Impetus project about smart city resilience. And the 2 other ones just started, both about wildfire, FireLog and FireS. So those are manned, but we are also, and these are members, qualified members who have applied to be part of the TIEMS team in the project. So this is a good benefit for also being a member, because this will be only open to international members. We are, though, expecting that we might get more projects in the future. We have already 2 proposals out pending. One is sent to CDRI, where we are in a big international consortium, where the Asian Disaster Prevention Center is our consortium leader. And we are expecting to hear if we are successful with that bid. This is quite a long, quite important big project where we will do our task if we are successful. The other one is some project for standardization called PrimeStand. And this will be probably known if it was sent in 23rd of November. So we will know if this project is successful, maybe in April. And there come new projects proposals. So this is, as I also mentioned, one of the biggest income for TIEMS as well. So I think that is what I can say at this time. I'm so happy to see that we still have quite a few people with us, that you have stayed all the way. And I have to tell you, I have listened to all presentations. So it's been a long week for me as well. But I like to say that I'm very happy and with all the presenters sending in and presenting, and also the chairs of the conference, which has been quite good, kept the discussions going, and also kept the time. But all the presenters were also very good on time, giving and allowing for questions and not taking time of others. I think that was great. And at the end, I like to thank Kyle and Victoria, who has been operating the Zoom platform. You haven't seen Victoria too much, but she can give you the picture now. She has seen to that you all have got the call in the right time and linked you in and followed up. So Kyle and Victoria, thank you very much for the great work you have been doing. With those words, if you don't want to add something, Kyle and Victoria.
Yeah, Harold, no, I just think it was a very interesting conference, very diverse in topics, and I think it was really setting some high standards for next year. So we'll see how George does.
Yes, I think that was a good challenge to George, about knowing George and the group we have in US and the potential cooperation we have with FEMA and with other organizations. That have to be great.
Well, we'll do our best, but it is a high bar. So, you know, friendly competition.
Yeah, friendly competition. And for those of you who listened to Steve Recca from the Pacific Disaster Center in Hawaii, he actually invited us to come and do a conference in Hawaii. And for those who haven't been in Hawaii, it's a beautiful place. I've been there once. So we look also forward for that. But when it can be, I'm not sure, because we have a program now all the way up to 2025. But who knows, we can do 2 conferences a year, so there's always a possibility to go to Hawaii. Okay, with those words, I like to close the conference, and I say thank you for joining, and thank you for being here and making this a good event, and have a good evening. And we continue the communication after the conference, and we see you in our webinar and in any workshop we do and in the conferences in the coming year. Thank you all, and the conference is closed.